Bum-ba-da-dum. Howdy, welcome to BanjoBenClark.com. I'm Banjo Ben, your mandolin teacher, here on the site that teaches you how to play mandolin, banjo, and guitar too. But this is Mandolin Week. I'm really excited because this is the first lesson in a course I have here on the site called Learn to Play in Any Key. I'm always seeing these debates on Facebook and other places about using a capo on a mandolin. And I just want to go on record by saying there are some applications where you do need a capo on a mandolin. But when you're just looking to play solos, general solos, and licks and fills and rhythm in various keys on the mandolin, you don't need a capo. And I remember having to make that transition back when I started playing mandolin in college, in my early 20s. I remember how intimidating that was. And so I want to take you through the process of how to wean yourself off of maybe the capo mindset and just learn how to not be intimidated by any key that you might have a song in, okay? So today's that first lesson. We're going to use the pentatonic scale as just a tool to begin unlocking this mandolin neck for us. And we're going to have a lot of fun. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, here in a moment, I'll ask you to come over to BanjoBenClark.com. Join as a Gold Pick member. You'll have access to this lesson, hundreds of other lessons on several different instruments. I'd be honored to have you. Let's jump in. In this first video segment of the lesson, we're going to work on finding the root to whatever chord or whatever key we're playing in. Just for the sake of beginning, we're going to start in the key of G, but we're soon going to be moving that around. In fact, by the end of the lesson today, you'll be able to take everything you know and immediately apply it to other keys. I'm excited to show that for you. But when you think about improvising or playing a song in a certain key on the mandolin, you have to know a little bit about the mandolin neck. To figure out where to even start. You've got to be able to know how to find your notes. Even if it's not automatic right now, you need to at least have a system of figuring it out. And if you have absolutely no theoretical knowledge of the mandolin neck, I want you to pause. I want you to go take my Unlocking the Mandolin Neck course on the website, because you're going to get the needed prerequisites to dive into this one with me. Okay, so as we think about playing in any key, let's start in the key of G. And what I want to do whenever I'm encountering a song that's in a certain key, I want to find what key that's in, and then I want to think about where are all my root notes. What do I mean by that? Well, if the song is in the key of G and you're playing over a G chord, the root note would be the G note. And as we begin to deal with these patterns and licks and scales, we need to know where they might start and where they might end. The other thing I'm going to think about is what are the most common chords that this song is going to go to. Now, all songs are different, but a lot of them are similar. And most of your songs are going to have the root chord in it, whatever key it's in. So if you're in the key of G, it's going to have a G, but it's also most likely going to have the 4 and the 5 chord. In the key of G, that's G, A, B, C, D. It's going to have a C and a D chord. So that's what we're going to start with today. We're going to explore the root and then how to get to the 4 and 5, and then we'll expand upon that in the future. Let's go ahead and pull up some tab here. The tab is just to show you what we're talking about, but we're not going to be dependent on this tab as we move forward. That's kind of the point, is to get off the tab and be able to put this stuff into practice. But when we think about the G root, where in the world can we find those G notes? Well, it's pretty easy to find one because there's an open G string on our mandolin. The lowest string on the mandolin, when tuned correctly, is a G note. Okay, so if we want to find another one, where do we go? Well, we could climb all the way up the scale, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and find another one up there on the 12th fret, but we're starting to get out of our, our normal human playing range, and instead of getting a G way up there, we can find that same G right here, and that's the kind of stuff that you'll learn on my Unlocking the Mandolin Neck series, so you want to be sure and watch that. So as we find that, after we get a finger on a root, it's really easy to find our other roots because there's a pattern for the mandolin. So if we have a G note right here, if we were to go up 5 frets and go and drop down a string, we'll find another root, another octave. Can you hear how those notes are similar? Because they're both G notes, they're just in various octaves. So we have a low G note, our next G note, we even have another one up here. And then if you were to do that same pattern again, except this time placing your index finger on that G note and stretching all the way up there, you would get even another G note. But we don't have to stretch all the way up there. We can actually find that right here. Okay, so I have found 4 different G notes that are fairly accessible on my mandolin. And why don't you just pause the video and just find those on your mandolin neck? You don't have to remember any other ones right now. I'd just like for you to find those and know where your G notes are. That'd be a good start today if you can commit that to memory. Okay, now let's think about our other two chords that are going to be really, really common in the key of G. And I explained how in most bluegrass songs, most acoustic songs, and even songs in just the Western musical tradition are going to very commonly have a 4 and a 5 chord. Now, you don't necessarily have to worry about all the theory that's involved with that, except to know that the song's going to go there a lot. So we need to be aware of when it does, and we need to know what to do when it goes there. So let's think about finding those 4s and 5s. And again, what do I mean by a 4 and 5? I meant that if I start on G note and I play up a major scale and I count my scale tones, it's the notes that are the 4th and 5th scale tones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And those notes, in particular, in the key of G, are C and D. C and D. So if I'm going to be playing over chords, over C and D chords, I would like to know where my C's and D's are too. That would be a good start. And guess what? It's not very hard because we can apply the same pattern that we just applied to our G chords. Remember how we can find the root and move up 5 frets and drop a string, and we'll do it again? Well, same thing here. If this is a C note, I'm just going to go up to the 10th fret here on the next string, and that's another C note. Pretty cool, huh? Oh, wow. Okay, well, we could do that again. Oh, we'd be getting way up the mandolin neck then. So instead, let's find our next C note here. It's on the 3rd fret, and then again, our pattern works. So guess what? Oh. Okay, so it's good for us to just see and visualize that I can find these octaves with that spacing right there, and also know that if I go up another string and drop down 2 frets, I can do the same thing. So 5, 10, and then drop down 2 frets, 3, 8. Now we can do the same thing with our 5, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. D note. We do have an open D string, but I want to stay closed for the most part. What I mean is not use our open strings in this lesson because I want to be able to transfer all of this to any key that we want to. So as we play that D note, can you find the rest of your D notes on the mandolin? Well, you should be able to if you just think about what we've learned so far, applying that pattern. So if we have our index on that D note, then we can drop down a string and go up 5 frets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, cool. And then guess what we can do? We can move the whole thing down 2 frets, drop down another string, and find our D notes. Oh, that's pretty cool, isn't it? So I've got my G's, I got my C's, I've got my D's. Oh, all right. Okay. Well, at least I know the root note to the 3 most common chords that I'm going to be playing over. And believe it or not, in the key of G, believe it or not, that's a lot of information. Now, the next thing we need to talk about is how do we get to those different notes? Because what a song's most typically going to do in the key of G, it's going to stay on a G chord for a little while. It's going to jump to a C, or it's going to jump to a D. It might have minors and other things in there, but we're just worried about the 1, 4, and 5 right now. So we need to be able to figure out how to jump back and forth on the mandolin next. So let's look at the relations of these 3 different root notes, we might call it. Well, if we started on our G string, or I'm sorry, our G note on the 5th fret here, look at measure 4. We could find our 4 and 5 pretty easily, right? Just linearly climbing up that string. So there's our root, 2, 3, 4, 5. Same thing we did earlier down here. Okay, so we see that whenever our root's right here, that the 4 is going to be up there and the 5 is going to be 2 frets above that. We could do the same thing starting on this G note. We can climb up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so 1, 4, and 5. Now, that's good to know what it looks like linearly. If you've got the root on one string and you want to travel up that same string and find the 4 and 5. But that's not really practical. It's not very ergonomic when it comes to playing mandolin because you don't play linearly. You've got 4 sets of strings. We need to be able to jump back and forth between the strings. So there's actually a pattern for how this 1, 4, and 5 relates without having to move so much and go up the same string. Let's look at that. That's in measure 5. Now I want us to start with our root. Again, is the G note for this particular lesson, for now anyway. And if we wanted to find our 4 and 5, remember we could climb all the way up and go 4 and 5. 1, 4, 5. Or we can have this handy dandy pattern here in measure 5. And if we find our root and you have your index finger on your root, if you just drop down one string and stay on the same fret, guess what scale tone you have? You have the 5. Well, let's prove that. Here's the root, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's the 5. Is that the same note as what we hear right here? It is. Well, that's pretty cool. Oh, guess what? So if I know that that's the 5, I bet I can figure out where the 4 is pretty quick too. Just jump down a couple frets, right? So all of a sudden, instead of having to go 1, 4, 5, I can go 1, 4, 5. Oh, that's pretty cool. Well, what happens if we travel up toward the ceiling? Well, if we keep our index finger on the 5th fret and we just move it down a string, that's our 4th tone scale, just down an octave. Let's check that out. So 1, 2, 3, 4. There's that C note, that 4. Ah, yes, those are in the same octave. Now you recognize that pattern, don't you? Okay, so that's pretty cool. If we know that that's the 4, then we know that we could go up 2 frets and find what? The 5. Wow, okay. So I just know anytime I have my root on any fret, if I drop down a string toward the floor, I land on my 5 chord. Okay, if I go up toward the ceiling, stay on the same fret, I'm on my 4. So if we can find our 5 down there and our 4 up there, then we can also find our 5 up there and our 4 down there. Does that make sense? Let's look at those patterns and we'll do a little exercise here to help that stick for you. Let's say in measure 6 that our root's right here. Our 4 would also be up there and we would get our 5 here. But again, you may not want to stretch that far, and we're going to have some licks that are going to ask you to not cover as much real estate later on. So instead, let's think about it like this, and let's switch fingers. Let's put our middle finger on the root. Look at measure 7. How would we get our 4? Just jump down a string, move down 2 frets. There's our 4. And then again, remember, same fret gives us the 5. The same thing whenever we move up toward the ceiling. We call it dropping down a string, but it's up toward the ceiling. It's kind of confusing, isn't it? We have our root. If we drop down, we have our 4 and our 5. So here's what I encourage you to do is watch this exercise that we're about to do. We're going to do it all in the key of G, where we're going to jump around from the 1, 4, and 5. But then I want you to take that, and since we're not playing any open strings, you can do it anywhere on the neck you want. Start with any root you want. You just have to keep the pattern the same. You have to make sure that you skip a couple frets here and there. Let's look and see what it looks like. Look at measure 9. Here's our root, and we're just going to practice going root, 4, 5, 4. And then we're going to add a little rhythm to it. So measure 9 sounds like this. That's pretty cool. Now let's go in measure 10. Let's use the 4 that's up here, and grab the 5 that's right beneath the root. So it sounds like this. So we're playing the same notes, we're just using a different octave, aren't we? Same notes, different octave. This time, let's scoot down and start in measure 11 with our middle finger on the root and grab this 4 and 5. All right, let's change our root. Remember, we can find a different root. We can find a root right there. So let's measure 12. And here's what I want you to see. Look at measure 12. That's 1, 4, 5, 4. That's the same thing as measure 9 that we just started off with. Just an octave above it. But the same pattern. I want you to see that. So when you put all that together, it's going to begin to train our fingers and our brain to know how to relate between the 1, 4, and 5. Much more to come on this, but this is how we're going to systematically train our brain to do that. The whole line sounds like this. Ready, go. Can you do it in another key? Let's take away the tab, and let's say that we want to do this in the key of A. What we need to do? Well, we need to find an A note for the root and place our index finger on that. Well, it happens to be right there on the 7th fret. I'll just share that little tidbit with you. Let's follow the same patterns to get the same 1, 4, and 5. Oh, sorry. Okay, so the point of that little exercise is when you get finished, you ought to be able to find any note on your mandolin neck and immediately be able to point to the 4 and the 5 of that note, either going down toward the floor or up toward the ceiling. Okay. Now, even if this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to you, or you're guessing about the application going forward, I promise you this is extremely useful. You're going to see that in the next video, and I want to jump into that now because we're going to take the pentatonic scale and create a little lick with it and start drilling these things to make our fingers get used to going to the chords that they need to go to. If you're watching somewhere else beside the website, I'd love to have you on board. We're not even halfway through this lesson. Let's continue on.